300 dead. Second Kings, futures decided. 3 days bought with bone and bronze. The Hot Gates of Thermopylae didn't just become a graveyard. It became a receipt, stamped in blood. That Greece would be forced to pay later. But let's go back 2 years, because this massacre doesn't begin with spears or shields or screams. It begins with numbers. Numbers so large they make men reckless before the wine even reaches their lips. Numbers that bend courage. Numbers that convince empires they cannot fail. Across the Aegean Sea, the Persian Empire did not think in cities or walls or borders. It thought in continents. Xerxes sat beneath carved stone lions, surrounded by gold, incense, and silence, and allowed himself to be called King of Kings without anyone laughing. Not because they feared his temper, but because they feared his reach. This was not poetry, and it was not exaggeration. It was infrastructure, roads that cut through mountains, depots stocked months in advance, messengers changing horses before sweat cooled, shipyards that never slept, scribes counting grain, silver, and men, not a metaphorical machine, a literal one, and men, so many men, that chroniclers would later argue about their numbers like gamblers arguing over dice they never saw roll. Modern historians try to behave, whispering figures like 120,000, 200,000, perhaps 300,000. Ancient writers did not whisper. They shouted, 500,000, 700,000, 1,000,000, mythic arithmetic, inflated by fear, repetition, and awe. The title of this story says 1,000,000 Persians because that is the number people remember. It fits the terror. It fits the legend. It also fits something else, the human need to make defeat feel cosmic. History, however, refuses to cooperate. History tells us overwhelming. Legend says 1,000,000. Either way, the ground at Thermopylae did not care. Stone does not count bodies. It only holds them. They did not know it yet. But Greece was already arguing about where to die, because Greece was not a nation. It was a collection of jealous knives left in the same drawer, scraping against one another in the dark. Athens looked outward. Ships, trade, silver, ambition. Sparta looked inward, discipline, land, fear of change. Corinth watched profit. Thebes watched rivals. Every city remembered old insults better than old alliances. The Persians understood this weakness perfectly. They did not need to conquer every Greek city by force. They only needed to make enough of them feel isolated, unsupported, and expendable. And in 480 BC, they came again. 10 years after Marathon. Not with an expedition meant to punish, but with an invasion designed to erase. Herodotus is the loudest surviving voice of this campaign, and through him the story acquires its hinges. The narrow pass, the stubborn king, the traitor, and the end that feels inevitable precisely because it is. Thermopylae, the hot gates, a wound carved into the land. Mountains pressing close on one side, the sea breathing on the other, sulfur springs bubbling beneath stone. The air tasted wrong there. Not just salt, not just wet rock, something sharper, metallic, sulfurous. The kind of smell that promises the underworld without pretending otherwise. This was where the Greeks decided to stand, not because they loved the place, but because they hated the alternatives more. In Sparta, King Leonidas was not the loudest man in the room. That was never his style. The trait the sources give him is colder and far more dangerous. Obedience. Obedience to law. Obedience to duty. Obedience to the idea that a king's body is not his own, but currency to be spent when required. When the decision came, it was not framed as can we win. It was framed as how long can we delay. Far from the past, another mind was already moving. Themistocles of Athens, a man whose defining trait was appetite. Appetite for risk, for victory, for being right when everyone else wanted him quiet. He understood what Leonidas did as well. This war would not be decided by heroic deaths alone. It would be decided by logistics, by time, by ships. Thermopylae was supposed to buy that time. Then there was a third name. Small, unpleasant, immortal for all the wrong reasons. Ephialtes of Trachis. His defining trait, in every telling, is need. Need for reward. Need for recognition. Need to matter in a story that would rather forget him entirely. And the fourth name, less famous but sharper, is Dionysus. Remember for a line that sounds too perfect to be real, and therefore probably is. When warned that Persian arrows would blot out the sun, he replied that they would fight in the shade. Men say things like that right before they die, when fear has nowhere left to hide. The past waited. The sea waited. The Greek alliance waited. And they made a decision that would seal Greece's survival by ensuring Greece's slaughter. The Persians did not arrive like a storm. Storms are chaotic, loud, directionless. This was a tide, measured, patient, relentless. Before the first spear touched flesh, before the first shield rang, the land itself began to feel smaller. The sea filled with ships until the horizon stopped being a line and became a wall. Mast layer behind masts. Oars dipped in unison, not splashing, not rushing, disciplined, rehearsed, endless. Men at Thermopylae watched this quietly, not because they were calm, but because fear had already done its worst. Once terror peaks, it has nowhere else to go. Xerxes did not rush. He waited 4 days. Some say he expected the Greeks to flee once they understood the scale of what faced them. Others say it was arrogance, ritual, or belief in destiny. More likely, it was calculation. Even an empire pauses before stepping on something sharp. On the 5th day, the order came. The first Persians advanced not as heroes, but as workers. Lightly armored Medes and Scythians, men meant to test resistance, not break it. They moved forward through the narrow pass, confident that numbers alone would crush what stood before them. They were wrong. The Greeks did not surge forward. They did not shout. They waited, shields locked, feet planted, spears angled. The pass compressed everything. Sound, motion, fear, until battle became mechanical. Step, thrust, pull, step. Persian shields splintered. Linen armor tore. Men fell not in dramatic arcs, but sideways, forward, down, piling where there was nowhere to retreat. The sea pressed behind them. The mountain pressed beside them. Panic had no space to breathe. Spartans rotated their line. When one man tired, another took his place. Precision replaced rage. Training replaced instinct. This was not courage in the poetic sense. This was muscle memory honed until individuality disappeared. The Greeks even pretended to retreat at moments, drawing Persians forward into tighter ground, then snapping the line shut again. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was humiliating. Xerxes watched, and his confidence cracked. He sent in the immortals, 10,000 elite soldiers, named not for bravery, but for replacement. If one fell, another filled the gap. To the Persian mind, this was invincibility made flesh. To the pass, it was simply more bodies entering a grinder that did not care what they were called. Armor met armor. Bronze rang against iron. Spears shattered. Men fought at arm's length, then closer still, until killing became pushing, choking, stabbing through gaps too small to name. Still the line held. By the end of the first day, the ground was slick. Not muddy, sticky. Blood does that when it doesn't have time to dry. Persian dead clogged the narrow ground. Greek dead lay fewer, but not absent. No victory is free. Night fell, and the Persians withdrew confused, wounded, furious. They had expected collapse. They found resistance shaped like stone. The second day followed the first like an echo. Different units. Same result. The past did what it was chosen to do. Erase numbers, reward discipline, turn excess into weakness. And yet, victory was rotting from the inside. Because somewhere behind the Persian lines, a man watched the fighting and made a decision that history would never let him escape. Ephialtes knew the land. He knew the goat path that wound to the mountains, a narrow track that bypassed the pass entirely. He did not invent the path. He revealed it. Motives matter less than outcomes. Greed, fear, hope, bitterness. History records results, not excuses. Under cover of night, Persian forces moved. Silent, guided, patient. The mountains that had protected the Greeks now betrayed them. At dawn, the warning came, not from Persian trumpets, but from runners. Breathless, broken, honest. The pass was compromised. The enemy would come from behind. This is the moment legends pretend doesn't exist. The moment where survival is still possible. Retreat could be ordered. The line could withdraw. Greece could live without glory. Leonidas dismissed most of the allies. not in anger, not in pride, in clarity. Someone had to stay. Someone had to die loudly enough that the rest of Greece would finally listen. 700 Thespians chose to remain, not ordered, chose. Their city would not survive memory the way Sparta would. But choice is heavier than command. The Spartans prepared, hair combed, armor checked, a final meal, not a feast, just food, just fuel, just routine clung to like a life raft. They advanced beyond the wall into wider ground, knowing exactly why this ground had been rejected before. The Persians attacked from both sides now, from front, from rear, from every angle the pass had once denied. Spears broke, swords came out. When swords broke, hands did the work. Teeth, helmets used as clubs, bodies used as barriers. This was no longer battle. This was resistance reduced to its purest form. Delay at any cost. Leonidas fell. How does a king die in chaos? Not with ceremony, not with silence. He died like any other man in a crush of metal and breath and pain. His body became a battlefield itself, fought over, lost, retaken. The final stand pulled back to a small hill, surrounded, exhausted, still standing. Persian arrows rose. The sky darkened. This time, they really did fight in the shade, and when it ended, the pass fell silent in a way only places soaked in sound can be silent. Thermopylae was lost. Greece was not, because time had been bought, and empires bleed when forced to wait. The air smelled of iron and smoke. Bodies stacked where men had fallen. The Spartans lay broken, but not meaningless. Behind them, the Persian tide had advanced, but the cost was staggering. Not numbers they could ignore, not pride they could claim. Every step forward had been purchased with suffering. The survivors, the Thespians, the few remaining Spartans, the scattered allies, moved quietly, not retreating out of fear, out of necessity, out of honor, the kind that does not care for comfort. Meanwhile, the Persian army paused, not from mercy, from calculation. The mountains had delayed them. The narrow pass had destroyed momentum. An empire that thought it crushed by weight alone had discovered that weight is meaningless against structure. Every hoplite shield, every spear angle, every disciplined footstep had turned simple math into a nightmare for Xerxes. The king counted bodies. He counted losses. He counted time. And in that counting, he lost a battle he thought was already his. The Greek survivors knew the cost. Their allies were gone. Their friends were dead. And yet in their eyes, a spark remained, a knowledge that sacrifice echoes, that Thermopylae was not just a pass, not just a fight, not just a story to be written. It was a statement. In Athens, Themistocles worked feverishly. Ships had to be built. Crews had to be trained. City-states had to trust one another. Even after betrayal had already proven the fragility of alliances, he knew Thermopylae was buying time, not delivering victory. Every hour the Persians spent chewing through mountains, every step they took through the pass, was an hour he could use, and he would use it ruthlessly. Meanwhile, Ephialtes faded from immediate attention. Small, thin, his name cursed but alive. Greed had delivered him a short-term reward. Long-term, history would not forgive him, because actions that seem clever in darkness often become history's most glaring betrayals in daylight. Back at the Hot Gates, the dead were more than bodies. They were symbols. Stone would remember them. Legends would remember them. And for a brief moment, the world paused to see what courage truly looks like when measured not in victories, but in minutes bought. The Persian army regrouped. They could not understand the strange alchemy that had turned a few thousand into a wall. They sent scouts again. They adjusted formations. They tried to intimidate. They offered bribes. They promised wealth. They tried everything but retreat, because retreat was shameful in the eyes of the King of Kings. On the Greek side, Aristodemus survived. The Spartans remembered him, but not with honor. Survival without consent in Sparta is sometimes worse than death. Shame clung to him like a second skin, and yet in silence, he carried knowledge. Knowledge of strategy. Knowledge of what it meant to delay a tide with nothing but discipline. The mountains whispered secrets. Paths once hidden, now revealed. The Persians moved slowly, carefully, every step measured. But time favored the defenders in ways armies rarely anticipate. For every hour spent navigating a treacherous track, a ship was launched. For every arrow loosened to a packed choke point, a city-state made a choice to trust another. The second and third days blurred into one. Noise, smoke, mud, blood, all mixed together. And yet, amid chaos, there were small acts of defiance. A Greek soldier raising a fallen comrade. A Spartan gripping his shield after losing a hand. A Theban refusing surrender. Tiny resistances. Small echoes of the principle that courage is not just grand gestures, but repeated choices in impossible circumstances. By the third night, the Greeks were surrounded, and yet, in that surrounding there was still strategy. Leonidas' foresight, even in death, guided their moves. The survivors were positioned always to delay. Every movement, every step, every breath was orchestrated to make the Persian advance costlier, slower, bloodier. Night at Thermopylae carried its own horror. Fires lit low to avoid detection. Men chewed hard bread, drank water tainted with sulfur, slept without comfort. Every sound, a branch snapping, a horse shifting, a whisper, became a signal. The enemy was not imagination. The enemy was real. Every breath mattered. Ephialtes' betrayal was complete. The Persian army had access to a flank, a path bypassing all the careful compression the Greeks had built. It was quiet, calculated, deadly. The rear guard, the few who remained, braced for the inevitable. And yet, even in the face of betrayal, their morale did not collapse. Because Thermopylae was not about surviving the battle. It was about surviving the story.